She walked out of the Mason Mug Café that morning, as if she were walking into the sunrise, apron untied, heart pounding, hands trembling, but head held high. 6 years of devotion, of learning every face and name, of turning a simple cup of coffee into a quiet sanctuary for men and women scarred by war, were erased in a single breath. You're done here. But in that moment of stunning calm, Grace Donnelly did something far more powerful than any barista's chant for a caffeine fix. She refused to betray her principles. She refused to ask a wounded veteran or his service dog to leave. And in doing so, she lit a spark that would soon shake not only this little corner cafe in Mason, Georgia, but the highest corridors of military command. Imagine being the person behind the counter, the one who knows which cup goes to which veteran on Heroes Hour, who remembers birthdays and blackout dates, who left her own grief, the kind that comes after losing a husband in Afghanistan, to steep into every steaming mug. Now imagine that same person, unwavering in her kindness, forced to step away while the state inspector's cold gaze bore into her. You'd think fear might break her. You'd think tears might flow. But Grace simply unhooked her apron, placed it on the counter like a white flag of quiet resistance, and walked out, leaving behind more questions than answers, and a camera that had captured her act of defiance for the world to see. What neither Grace nor the inspector knew was that one pair of eyes watching from a shadowed corner belonged to someone very different, the true CEO of the Mason Mug chain, disguised as a barista in plain clothes. Driven by a promise made years ago to protect veterans however she could, this undercover executive had been observing every detail of Grace's operation, the handwritten notes on the bulletin board, the gentle nod to an ex-Marine recon vet named Ray and his faithful service dog Shadow, the hush that fell when Heroes Hour began. With a hidden camera rolling, our CEO had gathered proof that real leadership often comes not from boardroom mandates or policy manuals, but from empathy, consistency, and unwavering courage in the face of rules that sometimes miss the human point. In the 15 minutes between Grace's dismissal and the roar from military Humvees rolling into the parking lot, the Mason Mug held its breath. The cobblestone sidewalks of a Norman Rockwell-style town might have looked frozen in time, but inside, the warmth Grace cultivated every morning had been doused only to ignite a conflagration of loyalty that would bring Marines clawing through the door in full dress blues. As those engines growled, every customer who had sipped coffee in that cafe understood this was no ordinary workplace spat. This was a test of honor, dignity, and the promise that a nation makes to those who serve. So here's the question that will keep you leaning forward through every twist of this story. What will an undercover CEO do when the person they intended to protect becomes the person who needs saving? In the coming minutes, you'll witness a transformation so dramatic that it upends corporate protocol, military tradition, and the very purpose of a little cafe. On the edge of Fort Gringinger's sprawling base, you'll feel the tension coil in the pit of your stomach as the inspector's clipboard clatters to the floor, and as Colonel Richard Gaines steps in to deliver a form of justice no policy can authorize. And you'll begin to understand that behind every cup of coffee, every nod to a struggling veteran, there can lie the seeds of change powerful enough to echo all the way to Washington, D.C. Stay with us, because in a world that moves faster every day, the quiet act of defiance by a single woman in an apron might just be the story we all need right now. She stood her ground, voice steady but soft. He's a registered service dog, sir. ADA law permits him here. Logan Prescott's lips thinned into a frost of disdain. I don't care what vest he's wearing, he snapped, eyes cutting through the cafe's low hum like a scalpel. Animals carry dander, saliva, hair. This is a food hazard. Unless you want this place shut down, that dog leaves now. Shadow sat perfectly still at Ray McMillan's side, head bowed in quiet defiance, as if even the service dog understood the gravity of the moment. Above them, hanging on a clipboard, the inspector's checklist fluttered, the very symbol of rule-bound authority challenging the simplest act of compassion. Little did Prescott know, just beyond the espresso machine, a hidden lens was zooming in on every tremor of Grace Donnelly's hands, every millisecond of her silent calculation. The CEO of Mason Mug, disguised in faded jeans and a barista's apron, was watching. In that heartbeat, the undercover executive recalled the promise she'd made at her friend Carter's memorial. Another veteran lost to the invisible wounds of war. Carter had been shuttered behind sterile clinical doors, paperwork piled on his bedside, longing for a nod, a cup of coffee, a human gesture that said, "We see you." When he died, the executive vowed to protect every veteran who walked through Mason Mug's doors. She traded boardroom power suits for the humble uniform of a barista, convinced that no strategic seminar or mission statement could match the power of simple kindness administered at eye level. And so she melted into behind-the-scenes shifts, memorizing latte orders and secret customer tells, all while her smartphone recorded the choreography of Grace's daily miracles. The first day's undercover had been a masterclass in humility. She'd spilled foam on a customer's sleeve, mispronounced a surname, and endured stifled giggles from front-of-house staff who thought this intern lacked finesse. Yet every evening, she scrolled through footage of Grace kneeling beside trembling war veterans, gently coaxing their names out of aching silence. Grace never rushed anyone, never pushed them to open up. Instead, she offered a handwritten note. You're seen. You're safe. That note was pinned beside a draft of fresh-baked muffins on the bulletin board, the kind of detail no corporate metric could capture. As CEO, she'd signed quarterly balance sheets with clinical precision. Now she saw that true ROI was measured and dignity restored, one refill at a time. Back in the cafe, Prescott's ultimatum dangled in the charged silence. Grace inhaled slowly, chest rising and falling with controlled resolve. Around her, the usual morning crowd, a cluster of veterans in polo shirts, a local teacher sipping dark roast, the mayor's assistant grabbing an almond croissant had gone still. Their eyes flicked between the inspector, the dog, and Grace. No one dared speak. The room seemed to shrink, walls constricting like of ice, and yet, Grace's lips curled into the barest smile. She leaned forward, apron straps taut across her shoulders, and said, I won't ask Ray or Shadow to leave. The words landed softly, but their impact radiated like a shockwave. Prescott's jaw clenched. The corporate manager standing behind him, Deborah Lyle, froze in mid-sip of her latte. Someone, somewhere, was still recording before Prescott could sputter a response. Grace unhooked her apron with deliberate calm. Each motion was measured, the strap sliding free, the knot unraveling, the fabric slipping off. She folded it neatly, placed it atop the counter next to her name tag, and turned without a backward glance. Her hands quivered only slightly, but her back remained straight. In that silent exit, she embodied every veteran who had ever felt abandoned by the system. They'd served. There were no tears, no tantrums, only the resolute dignity of a woman who knew that some rules are meant to be broken. As she slipped out the side door, the cafe's doorbell jingled once more, as though signaling the end of one chapter and the ominous suspense of the next. Inside, a collective exhale blossomed into hushed murmurs. The customers clustered around Ray's table, murmuring words of support. Damn right, she did the right thing. We're staying until she comes back. Ray set a protective hand on Shadow's head. The dog looked up at him, eyes solemn, tail flicking in approval. Lena, the young barista Grace had trained, froze behind the espresso machine, eyes wide and brimming with tears. No one moved to follow Grace. They knew it wasn't their place. Instead, they let the moment settle like coffee grounds at the bottom of a cup, thick with meaning, impossible to ignore. And all the while, the Undercover CEO's hidden camera captured it, the way veterans clenched their cups, the tremor in a customer's voice as she whispered to her friend, the subtle unity, binding strangers into something like family. In a tussle between policy and humanity, policy had lost. But for an executive weighing the next corporate move, the question remained, intervene now, or let Grace's act of defiance speak louder than any boardroom announcement? She hovered in the shadow of the entryway, earbuds playing a loop of Carter's favorite tune, a muted reminder of why she was here. Her heart hammered. What if stepping in would undercut Grace's agency, turning her quiet rebellion into a staged PR stunt? Yet what if doing nothing would let a precious opportunity slip away, allowing Prescott's edict to be the last word? As the cafe clock ticked toward the end of the morning rush, a faint rumble began to vibrate through the floorboards, soft at first, then growing in resonance. Like the distant roll of a storm, feet shifted on tile, chairs scraped, coffee rippled. In cups, customers craned their necks toward the windows, where sunlight turned dusty air into golden haze. And then the rumble sharpened into the fierce growl of military engines. For Humvees, headlights slicing through the mist, rolled into the lot in a slow, deliberate line, an echo of fate's own cavalry arriving at the last possible second. Inside, the cafe's near-empty tables were a tableau of frozen surprise. Prescott's face slack with confusion, Deborah Lyle's mouth parted in astonishment, and Ray straightening in his chair, meeting the oncoming thunderbolt with steady resolve. From the shadows, the Undercover CEO raised her camera higher, lens tracking every polished boot, every glint of a dress blue uniform. She felt a shiver run down her spine, not fear, but the electric thrill of witnessing the unexpected. Grace's storm was coming, and this executive had front row seats to an unmasking so spectacular it would rewrite the rules of corporate empathy forever. The question wasn't whether to step forward, it was how gracefully to do so. But that decision, for now, would wait. Instead, she kept the camera rolling, ready to capture the moment when compassion shattered the rulebook and when a CEO would emerge from the shadows to salute the real hero of Mason Mug Café. The roar of diesel engines swallowed the soft chatter in the Mason Mug's dining area, a deep, resonant growl that vibrated through tile and wood, rattling coffee cups and hearts alike. For Humvees, their olive green hulls gleaming with morning dew, lumbered into the parking lot in a deliberate, almost ceremonial procession. Headlights cut through the haze like spotlights on an empty stage, illuminating the cafe's worn sign and scattering the few lingering customers toward the windows. The ground shuddered beneath their tires, a rolling thunder that arrested every eye in the room. In those seconds, the Mason Mug felt less like a cozy refuge and more like the epicenter of something seismic, something that would upend every rule Prescott had tried so coldly to enforce. Behind the counter, the CEO turned barista pressed her back against the tiled wall, hard hammering beneath her borrowed work shirt. She raised her concealed camera, lens zeroed in on Grace's face as the manager re-entered the cafe through the side door. She had slipped out of only minutes before. Grace paused, her posture rigid, shoulders squared against the invisible weight of the inspector's threats. Her eyes flicked toward the windows before fixing on the broad form stepping down from the lead Humvee, Colonel Richard Gaines in full marine dress blues, gold buttons and crisp white gloves stark against the cafe's muted earth tones. The colonel, a man who once owed his life to the very veterans Grace protected, moved with the assurance of someone who needed no introduction. Yet, in that charged silence, every patron recognized his authority and his purpose. The hidden CEO's pulse pounded as she watched Colonel Gaines survey the scene. Marines fan out in formation at the sidewalk, an unwavering wall of disciplined resolve, while Prescott, clipboard in one hand, gaped like a man who'd been told the world had suddenly rotated on its axis. Deborah Lyle, the regional manager, took an involuntary step back, latte in hand as if drawn by an unseen force. The CEO knew this was her cue. Sweat beaded at her temples as she peeled off the apron straps, revealing the Marine insignia on the pocket of her blue-collared shirt. With a quiet click, she folded the apron and set it on a stool behind the counter, then turned to face the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice steady despite the adrenaline crackling behind her ribs. "I am the CEO of Mason Mug. My name is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hayes, or at least that's how I address my Marines. Today, I disguised myself as a barista to see what true leadership in our cafes looked like. What I witnessed was more powerful than any quarterly report. I saw compassion in action." Cameras captured her every word, pixels of defiance ready to stream across social feeds. Prescott's jaw dropped, Lyle's face paled. The CEO held up her badge, its polished gold gleaming under the cafe lights, then slipped off her baseball cap to reveal the ranks embroidered on her uniform. Colonel Gaines stepped forward, expression calm yet unyielding. He saluted Sarah Hayes with an unspoken agreement, then turned his gaze to Logan Prescott. "Inspector," he said quietly, "you don't need to know someone's rank to treat them with basic dignity. You don't need a badge to see a man in front of you who served this country." Prescott's scribbles fell silent as the colonel's words rippled through the room. Grace, standing beside Sarah Hayes, blinked twice, unable to mask her astonishment. Her boss, her clandestine boss, stood before her in full dress blues, a living testament to the impact she had made. Ray McMillan rose from his seat, shadow curled loyally at his feet. His weathered hand gripped the edge of the table as he spoke for the first time since the inspector's arrival. She didn't ask questions. Ray's voice rang clear and unwavering. "She didn't flinch when I walked in with Shadow. She just poured the coffee and gave me back my dignity." A hush fell, and then the cafe exhaled collectively. Tears shimmered in a few eyes. Others reached instinctively for their phones to start recording. In that moment, the CEO witnessed the culmination of Grace's silent crusade. Every handwritten note, every respectful nod, every free refill for a vet too anxious to sit in a crowded room, all had led to this undeniable vindication. Colonel Gaines nodded to Sarah Hayes. The CEO cleared her throat and said, effective immediately, "Grace Donnelly is reinstated as manager of Mason Mug Café. We are renaming this location Grace's House, where honor is served daily." Applause erupted like a tidal wave. Veterans began to cheer. Civilians rose to their feet. The blinds of order and policy had been torn away by a simple, profound truth. Kindness belongs to everyone. Deborah Lyle, still clutching her latte, tried to interject, but Colonel Gaines cut her off with a glance only he could deliver, firm, final, yet without malice. "You made your decision," he said. "Now we make ours." Two Marines moved forward in tandem, carefully removing the corporate logo from the wall behind the counter and folding it like a flag. Another replaced the menu chalkboard with one carried from a Humvee. In bold white paint, it read, Welcome to Grace's house, where honor is served daily, from the corner of the cafe. Sarah Hayes lifted her camera. She had been ready to capture Grace's termination as a cautionary tale. Instead, she recorded her unmasking and her triumph. Within minutes, the video would be live, its opening frames flashing across screens worldwide. Undercover CEO overturns firing honors. Café manager who stood up for a veteran's service dog. The story was already licking at the edges of virality, and Hayes knew the real power would be in the aftermath. How Mason Mugg's mission would ripple outward, inspiring other businesses to put people before policy. Meanwhile, Grace, chest still tight with disbelief, turned to meet Sarah Hayes' eyes. The CEO extended her hand. "Welcome home," she said simply. Grace took it, her grip firm despite the disbelief swirling in her mind. Around them, the cafe's reclaimed warmth seemed to glow brighter than any neon sign. Veterans spoke in bursts of laughter and tears. Ray slipped behind the counter to refill his own cup, and Lena at the espresso machine wiped her tears with an apron square. Shadow wagged his tail, nose pointed toward the new chalkboard sign, as if aware that this place truly belonged to him and every veteran he represented. In those moments, corporate turnarounds weren't about press releases or executive bullet points. They were about silent acts of courage echoing into monumental change. The Mason Mug had become more than a chain of cafes. It had become a beacon. And the CEO, having stepped out from the shadows to salute the real hero, knew the next challenge lay not in grand gestures, but in keeping the promise live, ensuring that Grace's house remained a haven for every wounded warrior walking through its doors. But for now, the unmasking was complete, the old rules laid to rest, and a new chapter beginning. As the applause faded to the gentle hum of the coffee grinder and the low rumble of departing Humvees, one thing was clear: compassion had not only broken the rules, it had rewritten them. From the moment Grace's tires crunched over the gravel of Fort Granger's gates, she felt the air shift around her, no longer the cozy warmth of Mason Mug, but the crisp discipline of a military installation. The barbed wire fences gave way to neatly landscaped avenues, flanked by flags snapping in the breeze. Army engineers marched in cadence past her car, their boots striking the pavement in even rhythm. It was a city of structure and ceremony, yet Grace's heartbeat drummed with an entirely new purpose. At the main security checkpoint, Colonel Richard Gaines stepped forward in his crisp khaki uniform. He offered a firm salute and a steady smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Donnelly," he said. "The Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative headquarters awaits. Let's get to work." Inside the utilitarian briefing room, a long table stretched under fluorescent lights. Folding chairs lined up against blank walls, and a single whiteboard stood ready, its surface pristine. Grace set her coffee-stained hands on the table and breathed in the quiet hum of potential. This was no longer a corner cafe sanctuary, it was the nerve center for healing veterans. Across the region, Colonel Gaines slid a manila folder toward her. The cover read, in stenciled military type, "Pilot Program BTWI Launch Plan." Inside, charts and budgets filled one side, the other was blank. "You'll direct this pilot," Gaines said, voice low but insistent. "No outside consultants. No glossy PowerPoints, just what you did at Mason Mug: community, routine, respect." He tapped the empty page. "Write your strategy here." Grace's mind spun. As a cafe manager, she had never drafted line-item budgets or coordinated federal grants, but she recognized that blank page as an invitation, not to replicate a corporate program, but to translate her cafe's small-scale miracles into institutional form. She imagined veterans wandering into sterile offices, expecting formality, and finding instead the warmth of a wooden counter, the offer of a refill, a handwritten note that said, "You're seen." That vision guided her hand as she scrawled the first line on the whiteboard: "Who needs a ride? Who needs a listener?" Within hours, the room transformed. Grace directed volunteers to arrange folding chairs in a semicircle, replicating Mason Mug's Heroes Are setup. She placed a pot of strong brew on a folding table, along with paper cups and handwritten welcome signs. She positioned a stack of notebooks, old cafe logs she'd salvaged so participants could jot down thoughts or just doodle. The sterile space softened before her eyes, becoming a living, breathing sanctuary. Late that afternoon, Tiffany Rios, the young burn survivor with scars weaving across her arms and jaw, timidly pushed open the door. A golden retriever puppy in training padded at her side. Tiffany's voice shook as she whispered, "I saw the video. I haven't been to a cafe since discharge, but I think I could sit here." Grace's chest tightened, and she offered Tiffany the first paper cup. "Welcome home," she said. Tiffany's eyes filled with tears, and the dog closed the distance to lean against her legs. That single thank you echoed through the hallway like a benediction, the proof that a pilot program built on compassion could work. Yet the transition from grassroots to government initiative wasn't without friction. Within weeks, auditors and program officers unfurled clipboards, bristling with questions. What certifications qualify you to counsel veterans? One asked, eyebrows raised. Show us the metrics, the evidence-based outcomes. Grace stood her ground, voice calm but unyielding. I don't have a counseling degree, she admitted, but I have 6 years of listening. If kindness were a certification, I'd hang my diploma on that wall. She pointed to the whiteboard message now smudged with coffee drips and fingerprints. Who needs a ride? Who needs a listener? The auditors exchanged skeptical glances, muttered unorthodox, but left without rescinding support. Their silence spoke louder than policy manuals. Sometimes it isn't about paperwork, it's about presence. Meanwhile, the momentum began to snowball. The Mason Herald ran a front-page feature from Café to Command. Grace Donnelly rebuilds trust, one cup at a time, with a black and white photo of Grace pouring coffee at a folding table. Social media lit up. Hashtag Grace's House trended among military spouse networks and veteran support groups. A Department of Defense rep quietly whispered of a nomination, National Civilian Commendation, for distinguished service to veterans. They had to keep it unofficial, yet the buzz reached Grace's email inbox. Subject line, **, do not forward, invitation to speak at National Veterans Advocacy Conference **. She stared at that subject line as if it were a luminous beacon, heart pounding with the same adrenaline she'd felt the morning she refused to break her soul. Behind the scenes, CEO Sarah Hayes monitored this burgeoning grassroots movement with a mixture of pride and strategic calculation. Her inner narration, once consumed by quarterly targets, now bristled with new metrics. Cups of coffee poured for silent sufferers, minutes spent in one-on-one conversation, the number of veterans who walked through the pilot center's doors. Each data point was a testament to a truth she had long since learned in uniform. You can't measure healing in spreadsheets. You measure it by dignity restored and lives redirected. Sarah drafted a viral clip highlighting Tiffany's shy introduction, Ray's steady gaze, and a montage of handwritten "Your scene" notes. Within days, a 3-minute video, Grace's House, a pilot with heart, racked up millions of views on social platforms, reshaping the conversation around veteran support from protocol-driven to people-centered. Yet even as the national spotlight brightened, Grace never lost sight of her roots. Every Friday, she visited Mason Mug, now officially Grace's House, slipping in quietly behind the refurbished counter to refill mugs and share a laugh with Lena, her protege. She posted new photos of VTWI gatherings on the same walls where veteran portraits lined the cafe's nooks. She scribbled fresh entries in her original notebook, met another vet who hadn't smiled in months. Replace fear with trust, one hand at a time. Each note was a reminder that the pilot program's success hinged on sustaining the small-scale rituals that had made Mason Mug legendary. As spring turned to early summer, Grace found herself boarding a flight to Washington, D.C., clutching her original Café notebook and Michael's old flannel watch, the one he wore in that 2 weeks prior photo. The invitation was formal now, a speaking slot at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference, hosted at the Pentagon's Pentagon Officers and Chiefs Association ballroom. She arrived to a surge of anticipation. Cameras lined the entrance, staffers buzzed, and a long table displayed a row of framed commendations. Yet Grace felt grounded by the knowledge that her power lay not in medals or honors, but in every unassuming cup she had poured. Moments before her keynote, she scrawled a final note on a small card: "Honor grows where kindness is consistent." Underneath, she tucked Michael's flannel in her notebook as a talisman. When the lights dimmed and the podium spotlight snapped on, her voice rang clear and intimate, as if she were speaking to just one veteran in a quiet Café corner. "I'm not a general. I didn't write policy. I managed a café. I served coffee. And I listened. Veterans didn't come here for advice, they came for presence. They needed to be seen." The room leaned in. Eyes glistened as she recounted the morning Prescott demanded the service dog leave, and the roar of Humvees that followed. A final slide flashed. It was never about coffee. It was about dignity. The applause rolled like thunder, but Grace's gaze found Sarah Hayes in the back row. The CEO offered a tight nod, as if to say, "We did it." In that moment, a pilot born in a small Georgia café had grown into a nationwide movement, a living blueprint for how empathy can scale without losing its soul. And as the audience rose in a standing ovation, Grace Donnelly realized that the next chapter would be written not in command briefs or accreditation standards, but in the countless lives she had yet to touch. One listening ear, one refill, one heart at a time. **, Grace's moment at the Pentagon, a new beginning **, when the spotlight found her. At the National Veterans Advocacy Conference, Grace Donnelly felt the room contract to a single heartbeat. The polished brass podium gleamed under glare that could have reminded her of Mason Mugg's overhead lamps, but here, the stakes were immeasurably higher. She began in her humble, steady tone, the same voice that once greeted early morning regulars at Heroes Hour. "I'm not a general. I'm not a policy wonk. I managed a corner café 15 minutes from Fort Gringinger, where I served coffee and, more importantly, listened." As her words streamed through the hall, it felt less like a speech and more like an intimate conversation. Photos of veterans leaning on folding chairs, framed alongside snapshots of Mason Mugg's reclaimed chalkboard, glowed on the screen behind her. With each anecdote the day Prescott tried to ban shadow, the moment for Humvees roared in. The whiteboard message: who needs a ride? Who needs a listener? Grace wove a tapestry of dignity restored by presence rather than policy. In the back row, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hayes dabbed at her eyes, her uniform immaculate but her pride unmistakable. This pilot program, born of Grace's compassion, was now official Department of Defense doctrine in the making. As Grace closed, she offered a simple challenge: if we can scale $1 million program on kindness, what else might change when we put people before paperwork? The room erupted in applause that echoed off marble walls. Cameras flashed, veterans rose to their feet. In that surge of sound and light, Grace realized that the quiet commitments she made every morning at Mason Mugg had just awakened a national movement. Full circle, quiet heroes in plain view. Later that evening, Grace returned to her hotel suite and reached into her bag for a faded photo. Michael in jeans and flannel, holding a coffee mug outside the original Mason Mugg Café 2 weeks before his last deployment. She taped it to the conference's green room wall beside a printout of the standing ovation crowd. Above both images, she inscribed, "Honor grows where kindness is consistent." Looking at those 2 moments, her everyday heroism and the spotlight of national recognition, Grace understood that the most profound acts often happen in plain view, right under our noses. So here's our call to you. How many Graces have you walked past without noticing? How many everyday heroes have offered quiet courage when rules fell short? Take a moment to reflect and share in the comments below a time you witnessed or offered a simple act that made someone feel seen and honored. Stay tuned for the next episode. This isn't the end of Grace's journey, it's just the overture. Next time, we'll ride shotgun as Grace and her team expand the veteran transition and wellness initiative to new bases across the country. Will corporate politics challenge her grassroots methods? Will the shadows of her past loss, doubt, unhealed scars resurface to test her resolve? Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a single moment of the next chapter in Grace's quest, where empathy meets enterprise and where one woman's courage continues to change a system.